Thank you for coming today. We partnered with Lauren through a network that we're part of called Chief, and we couldn't be more excited to be here today. One thing I'm going to just preface with is think of this hour as a tool for your toolbox and as us as your helpers. There is not for a single moment the thought here that anyone has done anything wrong to be in a crisis. Crisis happens for many reasons. Lauren probably will talk more about this, but personally, I have been in great brands that have made mistakes or their employees have made mistakes. I've been in terrible brands that also have made mistakes. So it's not, nobody is protected here. So this is not a ding on anyone to say, oh, busted, like you did something wrong. Now we're here to catch you. This is literally more about a life skill and in an organizational level of what you do when something like this happens. So without further ado, because we're already a little bit behind, I will start with a very basic question to Lauren, which is, what are we talking about when we say crisis? What is a crisis?
It's a great question. It's a great way to start. First of all, though, I do want to say, Liliana and your team, thank you so much for having me today. I am the crisis management practice chair for Haynes and Boone, which is an international law firm. So I am a lawyer and a litigator, but I am also a crisis manager. And when I get that question a lot because the phrase crisis is in my job title. So honestly, a crisis is kind of what keeps you up at night for your company, right? It can be anything in the energy industry. It can be something like a refinery exploding. It can be something like a government investigation. It can be indictments of your key employees. It can be a Me Too issue. Anything that keeps you up at night, worries you about business continuity at your company, or something that you're worried is going to be, on the front page of the newspaper. So a crisis really can be anything under the sun, whether it leads to litigation or a government investigation or not. All crises have the potential to do that. So crisis management is the pre-planning for that, as well as the handling of the immediate aftermath of a crisis, whatever that crisis may be. And then if there is an investigation or litigation that arises out of that, handling that investigation or litigation in cooperation with the other parties, and then eventually doing a lessons learned so that you can transform your customer experience for the better after the crisis has occurred.
Thank you. And another thing I wanted to ask, because it's we said a lot here. Well, if I'm a brand, how long does it take to have? How long is my crisis? How long would that take?
It really depends on the crisis itself. And unfortunately for us, it's usually dictated by the news cycle. One of the things that we strive to do is work very closely with media outlets. We have external PR firms that we work with because we're a law firm, we're not a PR firm. And so we try to quash things as quickly as possible, and we try to respond to news inquiries to help stories die down as quickly as they possibly can. But it depends. If it's a refinery explosion or an oil spill, say, it can take months, if not years, to investigate the root cause of that and to clean up any potential contamination. If it's a smaller event, it could be over and done with in a matter of days. So that doesn't mean that it's more or less significant because it lasts for a long time. And then on the outset, a protective plan, doing pre-planning can take probably a couple of weeks to a month, depending on how long and how robust you want that plan to be. So it really just kind of depends on what crisis you're talking about.
Great. And if you are hired, I'm going a little off script here, but I just wanted to, for the team our team here to understand a little better. Would you be working with a PR firm and the brand to do this, to do this planning of the crisis management piece?
We work with PR firms very frequently. It depends on the company. So a lot of companies have internal PR and communications folks. Other companies are smaller and they don't. So depending on what their needs are and depending on what their potential crises are, we definitely partner with outside PR firms to make sure that their needs are being met. For example, if the crisis that keeps you up at night is something where you're going to be featured in the paper or something where you're getting a lot of media calls, about something that could happen at your company, then we would certainly work with an outside PR firm, not just one who's good at branding and good at reputational PR, but one who is particularly skilled in crisis communications, because those are very, very different things. And a typical PR firm who does not have that crisis planning and crisis response skill may not be serving you properly when it all starts to hit the fan.
And in that vein, when is the right time to engage with someone like you?
Yeah, the sooner the better, right? So if we've helped you put together your crisis plan, then we can help you respond to it more effectively. If we're getting a call about your company for the first time, when you get sued, it's definitely already too late. If you have been in the news for days or even weeks, and then you say, oh, well, we might get sued because of this, there might be an investigation because of this, we should call the lawyers, you've probably already done things that are going to hurt you in the investigation or the litigation. And then, of course, our team does a great job of getting up to speed on people's companies and industries as quickly as possible. But if we've done the pre-planning for you, if we've met with you before things really go off the rails, then we will already have a robust understanding of what crises you might face and how you might be able to better plan and respond to those. And Liliana, I have a question for you, actually. What is kind of on the same vein, right? From a timing perspective, from a when do you guys get involved? I mean, it seems like a good time that everyone would think of to change their crisis, their customer experience would be after the fact, right? I'm dealing with this crisis, everything has died down. Now we can deal with our customer experience. But is that really what you would recommend, or would you guys need to get involved sooner?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, and I remember even when we were forming our little endeavor here, that we talked a lot about crisis as a trigger to reassess your customer experience. And I really think that we have an overlap with you in the sense that, if you have any type of crisis, that means you already are finding things that you knew were not quite there and you were stretching, breaking completely. And in that sense, having a customer experience program in place is not something that you're going to be able to pull off in a month. So starting as early as possible to understand who would be on that team and how would you set up a whole program around addressing structural issues that cause that that crisis is something that it needs to happen sooner rather than later. I have seen this happen a couple of times, and I can attest that it takes quite some time, because having a crisis internally is not something that one person single-handedly caused. It's a symptom of something that is much more bigger and encompasses many more things. But I think we have some polls that I wanted to ping Rachel to serve, because I think we had a couple of things to ask our audience to just see if they are ready or if they have any risk. Maybe Rachel, you can serve one of our polls just to see
interactive, everyone.
How ready is our audience for something like this to happen?
Yeah, so this one says, if you had to reach your company's CEO on their personal cell phone in the next 2 minutes, could you do it? If you got a call that your system was down, or that you had a cybersecurity attack, or that there was something going on at one of your facilities, would you be able to reach your CEO, not on their work line, not by email, but on their personal cell phone in the next 2 minutes? So go ahead and answer that poll.
And from a former, and Jason, I know you're here, from a former JetBlue person, I can tell you that that was something we definitely had in place, especially when social media came about, because we would have, if anything happened on a plane, and there was a video leaked from a passenger, that was a situation where you probably needed to know. You really needed to know what's happening.
Well, and after we see the results, I'll talk everyone through why this is important. I want to see, maybe all of you are well prepared, and we don't need to lecture you on the importance of it.
Hi, everyone. I think it depends on which organization you work for, the size and the maturity. But I think I've worked for organizations whereby we've got business continuity plans, which are in place, and they're reviewed as an audit process, typically every three months, 6 months. And then, we've dealt with other customers and gone back what Liliana said, and you'd have disaster recovery plans in place. And that goes back particularly to, technology supported infrastructure. But absolutely. And then there's, then it goes back to, different activities on a different level of, people, terror, etc. And they're all handled, through marketing, which have their own business plans for communication. So I think, there's multiple arrays of different crisis handling, but all very interesting depending on the line and the business that you're involved in.
I think that's so well said, Jason. And it looks like most of you actually are able to reach your CEO in 2 minutes on their personal phone. We've got 67%, so I love that. For the 33% that said no, the reason, and this may be intuitive, but the reason we want to make sure that you have access to that, and it might not be the CEO in your case, but whoever your key stakeholders are, right? Whoever you report to, whoever you need to contact in the event of whatever crisis you might be facing, it's because crises often overlap. And so you might be dealing with a facility crisis, but you may also not have access to your computer system. I'm located here in Houston, and many of our clients are affected by hurricanes, and there's power outages, there's internet outages. And if you are relying on your internal computer system to access contact information for key stakeholders, then you might not be able to do that in a crisis. So for the 33% of you that said that you're not able to access that information, get your key stakeholders saved in your cell phone and in the people that you work with cell phone, so that you can access that as quickly as possible. And it's not just people that you would report up to, that you would fear that call of, oh no, this has happened, it all hit the fan. But it's also people who are potentially affected by incidents. Perfect example is, I'm not sure if those of you on this call have heard about the chocolate factory explosion, which sounds made up, but there was literally an explosion at a chocolate factory in the Northeast recently. They were relying on local law enforcement to contact people in the area who were potentially affected by it because their customer lists and their employee lists were compromised in that explosion. And so they, as a company, didn't have access to very crucial information that they needed, and they therefore had to rely on another agency that they were not affiliated with, that might not be doing the messaging that they want their customers and their affected people to be receiving, all because they didn't have the directory that they needed. So, so think beyond just who you report to, and think about who you also might need to contact in the event of a particular crisis.
Yeah, I think another thing I wanted to mention in this vein is, in general, media training. Because I have lived through these challenges. To me, you have 2 or 3 ways of addressing a crisis, right? One is the actual customer recovery, which we'll talk more with Lauren about later. But the other one is, what would happen if a journalist just whistles through their ways and get hold of somebody before you do?
Yes,
and your leader
fear.
doesn't know. Yeah,
that's my biggest fear. And it's a great question that prompts our next poll. So pretend your company is dealing with a consumer facing crisis, right? Whether it's been in the news already or not, and you or someone in your division gets a call from a reporter asking for comment, just an innocuous, hey, this is going on, do you guys have any updates? Answer this poll with what you would do, whether you would answer their questions honestly and openly, nothing to hide here. You'd answer their questions, but off the record or on background so that you can't be quoted directly. You would provide maybe some limited details, maybe a prepared statement. You would say no comment, or you would refer them to someone else internally. Not my problem. You need to talk to our CEO. You need to talk to our legal. You need to talk to our comms folks. Go ahead and answer that one. I'm just going to answer incorrectly so I can see the results. And while we're waiting for the results, one of the reasons why this is important, you might go, Lauren, you're not a PR firm. Why? You just said you're a lawyer. It's because these sorts of statements can have a huge effect on not just litigation in terms of this statement is exhibit A in a trial about whatever happened, but it can actually affect whether there's litigation or not. If you put a statement out there that enrages the public or enrages your potential shareholders, it can have drastic effects on whether there's litigation at all. So the majority, 75%, said they would refer them to someone else internally, like comms, the CEO, or legal. 15% was the next biggest. They said no comment. 5% said provide some limited details. 5% said answer open and honestly, and 0% said off the record. So a little bit of this is going to depend on your crisis. You definitely want to have a key spokesperson at the company. That is part of your crisis planning, right? So that person is going to have been identified way in advance when you do your crisis planning. Ideally, it's someone in communications. If you have a smaller company or if it's a particularly large crisis, you want that to be the CEO. You never want legal to be the one communicating, because then you have attorney-client privilege issues, but legal should be involved in drafting whatever statement it is. But assuming you get it into the right hands, right, you want to provide some comment. So the 15% of you that said no comment and the 5% of you that said answer the questions openly and honestly, those are kind of two wrong sides of the same coin, and we want to meet in the middle, right? So if you say no comment, you are allowing everyone else to structure the narrative about your crisis, right? You are essentially stepping out of it and going, whatever everybody else is saying is what people are going to hear, right? You can give a no comment, right? Something along the lines of, we're aware that there's been a fire at our warehouse in Houston. We are investigating the cause of that, and our thoughts and prayers are with anyone who was injured. Right? The more detail you can give, the better, right? We had 5 first responders on scene within 10 minutes attending to the victims. That doesn't really sway anything one way or the other, but those numbers give people kind of something to hold on to, and it gives them the impression that you guys have this under control. Right? Those statements are going to be very crucial to be vetted by your legal department or your outside legal counsel like us, so that you're not saying stuff that's going to hurt you in litigation down the road. My favorite example to also give, because I deal with a lot of oil and gas companies, is what I call the safety third principle. So this is something that I stole from Mike Rowe, who used to do dirty jobs. He used it to refer to something else, but I like to use this unofficially, because the number one thing that people kind of immediately want to say is safety is our first priority, right? That sounds great. The problem is that when you say something like that, you are setting yourself up to be contradicted, right? If any instance you did not put safety absolutely first, which by the way, nobody does. I wouldn't be standing in a 39-story office building right now if we all put safety first, right? We wouldn't all be staring into these blue screens and ruining our eyes if we put safety first. So as soon as a plaintiff's lawyer, as soon as an investigator hears something like that, they start thinking about ways that you didn't put safety first. So you can say something like safety is a priority, or safety is important to us, right? But when you say it's the end all be all, you're setting yourself up for failure. Let's go to the third poll, Rachel, so we can talk through that. So let's assume for purposes of this poll that your company is facing a crisis and that you don't have a communications policy, or you have a basic one about using your personal device. Because it's a crisis, let's pretend it's happening in the middle of the night and you are texting and emailing your coworkers about the crisis and your response from this personal device. The question is, do you have to disclose those communications to your company after the crisis has settled, or if there's litigation or an investigation? Your options are yes, because they're relevant, because they're about the crisis response. Yes, but only if my company has a personal device policy saying I have to disclose these communications. Yes, but only if I get a subpoena from the government or in litigation. Or no, I don't have to disclose them because they are not on my personal, or on my work phone. They're on my personal device. Let's go ahead and answer that, and then we'll take a look at the responses. This is something that comes up in almost every crisis that I deal with.
I think I'm back.
Hey, we can hear you.
Sorry
Oh.
about it, guys.
We were just going through the results of this poll, and I am hearing an echo on my end. Okay, that's gone. Let's take a look, Rachel, if we have the results from this poll. Here we go. All right, so 39% of you said yes, you have to disclose it because they are about the crisis response. That's almost always certainly going to be the right answer. So good job, y'all. 22% said yes, but only if my company has a policy requiring disclosure. 33% said yes, but only if I get a subpoena, and 6% said no. You have to disclose those. They are relevant to the crisis. They are relevant to the crisis response. If there is any sort of litigation, or if there is any sort of government investigation about that, those are going to have to be preserved, and your company could be sanctioned both criminally and financially if they find out that you destroyed those. So best case scenario is you don't use your personal device for work unless you are authorized to do so by your company. If you don't have a personal device policy at your company, or one that particularly responds or addresses crises, you want to consider getting that. But any information is discoverable. I have cases where employees, especially if there's like, again, an explosion or something a little more photographable, where employees put things on Snapchat and Twitter and all the Be Real, all that crazy stuff, and that's all discoverable too. So make sure that if you're responding to a crisis, that you are very aware of what you are doing to communicate. Verbal communication is always better than written communication, and be aware that whatever you're creating in terms of documents is going to be something that you have to turn over to your company, or if you are the head of company, something that you are entitled to get from the employees dealing with the crisis.
Hey, just because we have Julie here and I know what her business line is, and what if you're managing a platform where people are talking on your platform?
Great question. So if it's something about the crisis you're dealing with, or whatever the litigation or investigation is about, that's all stuff that presumably you can collect pursuant to your terms and conditions and your end user agreements. If you are that person and you're getting a subpoena, let's say, for someone else's litigation that you're not involved in, you almost always have to comply with that subpoena, but you may have, again, terms and conditions or end user agreements that that dictate whether you do that or not. But I know in particular, all of the big social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of that, they, in civil litigation, they give all of that over immediately. Also something just for all of us to be aware, your Facebook messages are very, very discoverable. Even the stuff that disappears after 24 hours and all of that, that's all still out there. So I know we want to talk about the customer experience. So I'm going to talk really briefly about if once your crisis is over, and we, by the way, we have only scratched the surface, right, of how to do crisis management. So for those of you that don't have a crisis plan, for those of you that want to put one together, or want to just talk about details of crisis management, contact me offline and we can really get into the weeds about it. But once your crisis is mostly over, once the dust has settled, you want to make sure that, you know, your C-suite, your legal function is moving forward. A lot of people, especially lawyers, don't want to do lessons learned, right? They want to move on from the crisis and pretend like it never happened. But it is very important to do a look back and to do a lessons learned, even if it's a very quick one, not only to prevent whatever crisis it is from happening again, but crises have the tendency to reveal holes, not only in, you know, operations and things that, you know, might have happened from like a safety standpoint or a communication standpoint, but they also show holes in your customer experience. And so I would love to talk to you, Liliana, about, you know, as part of that lessons learned, as part of that crisis response, how you can use it as a proactive opportunity for your customer experience, as opposed to just a defensive reactive opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I think the core of what you said is the key nugget here, which is almost facing the music and taking the issue that happened not as something you deny that is important, or downplaying it, or saying it's gonna go away, or we got it covered with some corporate speak, but rather taking that moment to be authentic with your own employees, I think is key to figuring out how to regain the trust and confidence of customers. I think we often forget that the path to the customer hearts is the employee's heart. So getting that authenticity internally, and first making this commitment internally that you are vulnerable and that you see that there is a real issue versus downplaying it, is a very, very key first step. That is really important. And the next, I think, what powerful leaders do then as a next step is to take that to as a rallying cry, and almost kind of galvanize the audience and the people that are working for the organizations to say, we're going to come stronger, we're going to come better, we're going to be to be even more mature as a brand after this, and take that disaster, scary, somewhat even humiliating event, because now your neighbors are calling you asking, hey, do you work for this firm? And making it into something that is connecting people together. I think is extremely important, and very much a customer experience thing, because customer experience starts with a plan and with understanding that what the customer wants is not necessarily met entirely by the brand. That's in peaceful times, without a crisis. With a crisis, you probably have disappointed your customer and at mass. So now it's kind of like the same event has happened, but now it's everyone. There's no segmentation needed anymore. It's like everyone feels the same way. And by the way, they just told you. So having that first step is really, really important, that I think is something that very few brands do. And the second thing I think that needs to happen is to really take the time, together with what you're talking about. I love that you're doing the same. I think a business should do the same, of taking the time to understand what really caused this to happen. One great example that I can bring is what they call the Valentine's, crisis of JetBlue, where there was a pretty big challenge with customers being stranded in the airports in a very snowstorm, and that was bad. Now, if you look on the surface of that challenge, what happened? Like, why did it happen? At the end of the day, it turned out that it was the culture itself that caused it. It was the culture of, we can do it better than everyone else, and we're going to be there for our customers, that caused the big crisis. If JetBlue had just said, well, this is not a big deal, that wouldn't have made them survive. But the reason they survived at the time was because it really took a hard look at, hey, like what caused this? Hey, we need to get more mature. We need to understand that now we have more customers, more complexity in the system. Well, that means we need to invest in operations like never before. They did that. Hey, what do we do with the customers? Well, we need to figure out a program. And the Bill of Rights at the time was a very big commitment that still they live with, very big expense. Because again, we're talking about many years ago. Right now, many airlines have this type of Bill of Rights situation, but at the time they were extremely controversial and generous with their program, to commit to giving customers monetary money back when they're controllable delays.
And I think you're so right to focus on the customer experience during a crisis too, because I have a client that's a public utility, and they had their response to a crisis that they went through recently was very, very robust, very great. They gave all of the information to their potential consumers, but in order to get that information, you had to create a profile on a website, reset your password. Like, there were like 12 different hoops they had to jump through, and there was no one thinking about what the customer experience was in the response to the crisis, right? And because of that, they created hundreds, if not thousands, of plaintiffs out there, because people were just cranky, for lack of a better word that I won't share publicly, right? About about how they were treated by this company. It made it seem like they didn't care because they had to like jump through all these hoops to get the information that they were being provided. So I think that's such a great point, Liliana. And tell me, like, when we say customer experience transformation, you've talked about this a little bit. What does that have to do with crisis? I mean, isn't that, a lot of people would say, isn't that a branding issue? And isn't that something that we can look at, at later on once we've dealt with the expense and the time that we're putting into this crisis?
Yeah, thank you again for going there, because I think that's where I wanted to also go, is in terms of transformation. Why we're talking about transformation? Because if you have a crisis, that, going back to what I said earlier, that most probably means that some area of your company that you knew you're exposed in, that now it's kind of, you've reached the breaking point, right? It may be that you've underinvested in technology. It may be that you have figured out that it's not urgent to figure out something in operations. Either way, when something happens, when it snaps, 9 out of 10 employees would tell you, yeah, I knew this is a risk. I knew, we all knew about this.
Yeah.
And I think the transformation piece comes from finally taking care of what you knew you needed to take care of before. Which brings me to our next poll, about you guys. If you were asked today, and again, you work in different companies, where your redo, or for lack of a better word, I'll use the word exposure, but which one element of your company would you focus on to refresh or invest more into, to understand, to get things better? I'm gonna do this so I don't skew the data. Where would you say is your brand weak spot?
What do you typically see with the clients that you work with? I mean, what are the areas?
I mean, to be honest, it's because things are interconnected, right? Like, usually the expression of the challenges go in the operation, because that's where the customer really is interacting with the brand. But that's just the surface piece. The enabler of this operational element to not work well is usually because of a technology challenge that hasn't been invested properly, and because there is a culture element that needs to be addressed. And the way things are connected essentially is, usually you have a leader who, for whatever reason, either didn't come from the background of that area, or just has different priorities. When we become leaders, we all over index from where we came from. If you have a leader that came from the operation and now they're responsible for marketing operation, they'll stay in the operation more. If you have somebody who came with marketing and now you gave them a marketing, communications, and some sort of ops role, it again goes back to, I'm going to spend more time where I feel my sense of comfort. So having that maturity as a CEO to recognize the tendencies of your leadership team, that they're going to kind of stay in one area and over index somewhere else, I think is extremely important for what you and I are talking about right now, because people are all humans, and they just need this management. Everybody needs to be managed one way or another. Yeah. I think I see now the results, which is awesome. Thank you, ladies, for taking.
It looks like
it is quite interesting. Yeah, tech, culture. Yeah, wow. I honestly did not expect that. This is quite an interesting answer to what we're talking about here, which tells me also, that a customer experience transformation is definitely the answer, because if you do a transformation, you probably would do all of these pieces, right? It's not going to be one thing. When you're starting to do the work, a transformation is much more massive and enterprise level, which leads me to the next poll, which we had. What would be the first thing you do if you go on this transformation journey? what would be the first step that you would take to regain the trust of your customers? Where do you think you should start?
That's a great question.
Am I good now? Did I break it again? Oh,
Yeah.
good.
And while we're waiting for those poll results, I'll say, I mean, that's part of what's so great about the crisis planning part of this too. And why I love what we do is we sit down with our clients on the pre-planning side and we learn everything we can about their business so that we learn like, okay, the tech part needs some help. The culture needs some help. And because of that, you know, we're not consultants. We're not the big consulting firms, but we can identify like a crisis in this area might be more difficult for you because you've identified those pain points. And so I love how it dovetails with that poll you just did.
Okay, well, I want to, now that we have these results, I want to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so the knee-jerk reaction is to act and to do something very quick. And I completely agree that that's something that will be part of your overall plan. I highly recommend that that's not the first thing you do. The best first thing to do is really to go as high up as you can and say, hey, let's have a reflection session. Let's go and figure out if our mission is the same mission, if we've deviated from the mission, where did we deviate from the mission? Because if you take the time to first reflect and have this mission culture, you know, kind of conversation, then the action that you're going to take may change. And like what Lauren was saying is what you say first is extremely important. I think in customer experience, regaining trust management type of work, the first act is also very important. So taking the time to reflect and make sure that it's the right action, I think is very important. I'll give you an example. And again, I don't want to talk about specific brands. That's why it's so difficult to have a crisis management Zoom, but there was a brand that was under attack recently, and I think they decided to act at the same moment where the attack came, screenshotting emails and posting it on social media. That type of reaction, because I think it wasn't with that mind of reflection, caused even more of a challenge. So I think having some thoughtful conversations is really, really important to take that time.
I think that's right. And obviously, selfishly, I'm going to say, you know, involve legal, involve your internal comms folks with those discussions, because what might be exactly right from an operational standpoint and a customer experience standpoint might cause legal issues. And even if it's still the right thing to do, your legal folks want to know what's going on so that they're not caught off guard later on. That's always the work as a crisis manager and litigator when you find out things that you should have known way earlier.
Okay, well, there you go. I think question times is the right phase right now, so we have at least 10 minutes for people to ask questions. Anyone would like to ask anything specific or anything that's on your mind? Here we are here for you.
It's some of the less sexy parts of crisis management, but you have to review all your applicable contracts, right? If we put together a crisis plan for you, we will have done that on the outset. But one of the things you're looking at is your insurance agreements and what's covered. I have a case where there was an organization who had trees located on their facility and on their premises. And it was a consumer facing business. A tree fell during a very high volume time period. And a lot of their consumers who were present were children. So some of the children who were there were injured when the tree fell. Because we were able to review their insurance policy quickly, we determined that their insurance policy actually covered medical expenses for people who were injured on their premises. And so if you had a similar agreement, you know, you could do what we did there, which is contact the potential plaintiffs, contact the injured parties and say, hey, our insurer are completely willing to cover your medical expenses. The problem there, of course, is you have to get to them before they hire a lawyer, right, before they decide to sue you. And so if you have that crisis management plan in place and you have already reviewed those contracts before something happens, then you are aware that you can do that immediately, right? You don't have a couple of days delay, because sometimes that can be too much. So that's an example of crisis management done well, because it fends off potential plaintiffs in litigation, and your insurance ends up, covering the costs that you would have to pay out. And then you save all of the defense costs as well. From a marketing standpoint, that's difficult, right? Because in that situation, of course, you don't want to go out there in the news and say, hey, everybody, like, this is what our policy says. And this is, but in that case, we were able to publicly say things in response to media inquiries, like, yes, we're in communication with the family, right? And yes, we've talked to them. Yes, we visited with them. And that, publicly kind of also helps the story go away, because the reporters that we were working with got the message, like, okay, they're working this out, right? And so there's not really as much of a story there. So that's one small but important example.
And now, from a customer experience perspective, what I would say, to me, that we promote and work with clients to work on is communications. So when the best way to manage a crisis is to be accessible and to offer communication, to be abundant with the information that people may need. Like, again, back to that empathy. All of the questions that a victim or somebody who is hurt in this situation may have, to have this accessible and easy to retrieve is the first, like what Lauren was saying earlier, again, like, getting information shouldn't be hard. That's the least you can do. Take care of that immediately. I think is a best practice that I think is important. And the second thing that I think people expect to happen, which when a crisis is managed well, is to show, I mean, even Southwest is doing now, right? They're very public about their plans, like, to show that you're actually taking structural actions and to communicate that you have taken whatever happened seriously.
Yeah. I have a question in the chat, a direct message that says, would it be okay to contact law enforcement if you have a lot of media outside of your door? I would encourage you not to do that. Liliana probably agrees from a customer facing standpoint. The optics of that don't look good unless there is some sort of actual danger to your employees or your customers who may be entering the site or the store. I think that the optics of that would probably work against you.
I agree.
Rachel, do you have other questions that have come through?
I do. So what if my crisis has something to do with my customer experience? How do I handle that from either side? You talked about empathy, Liliana. How can we bring empathy and authenticity into that process, knowing that what sparked the crisis was what we're reaffirming to?
Such a great question. Liliana, I want to hear your perspective on this first.
No, this is a fantastic question. Well, I mean, I think that when we're talking about customer experience and challenges in customer experience, I think we need to break this down again to the core, which is connection, vulnerability, and trust. Now, these are strong words, so I would go back to this core human connection basics and think through that lens whenever you address something that's customer experience related. I had, again, another thing that was not handled so well, and it caused worse crisis after, was when we reached out as a community to a brand saying, hey, we have a concern, and that person showed up with their chief legal counsel. Now, there is a moment where nobody says do not consult your legal counsel. But the optics and the customer experience side needs to be very well choreographed and thought through from the emotional charge of the other side, through that empathy lens. Is the first communication with your customer the time to bring publicly, visibly the counsel? No. You have to go with the benefit of the doubt and the vulnerability, and of course, get educated, get coached by your legal counsel, but do not go with the legal counsel to the meeting, because now you're moving the conversation to a different space that it's not necessarily needed yet. And then it's going to trigger the other side to move to that space too. You just move them to another space where you don't know where they came from. They may have come as a customer to just say, hey, I love your brand. You messed up, but because I love you, I want to give you benefit of the doubt. And I just want to be heard. 9 out of the 10 times people just want to be heard. So allowing for that with the patience that you and love and care to your customer is probably the first step that I would absolutely recommend you do. And the second thing is, again, when you embark on remedying and doing whatever you need to do to fix this customer experience, communicate. Keep telling them what you're doing. Even when it's 6 months out, don't forget, don't get busy. Keep on, finish that calm and make sure that you've done your complete due diligence and your whole arc journey of the crisis before you move on completely.
And I'll note too, from a legal perspective, I mean, I completely agree with what Liliana said. From a legal perspective, you want to fix your customer experience if that is part of what caused the crisis, right? In most jurisdictions, there's a legal principle called subsequent remedial measures, which essentially means that if you have something wrong and it causes a problem and you fix it, the fix cannot be introduced as evidence in litigation down the road to show, see, they fixed it, so clearly something must have been wrong. That's the rule in most courts because they want to encourage companies to fix problems that exist, right? So you have to do it the right way. You have to actually fix the problem. But if you have something that gets fixed later on, that usually cannot be used as evidence against you that it was wrong in the first place. So obviously it'll depend on what you're talking about here. But if it was something that was a direct consumer facing issue that you fixed later, I think that would be something that would be excluded from evidence. I know we're coming up on the 1 o'clock hour. Rachel, do we have time for maybe one more question?
Yeah, we could fit in one more. When you're at the point of crisis, something has already gone sort of horribly wrong, right? So from each of your perspectives, what can you do proactively? Lauren, you've mentioned coming up with a proactive crisis plan, but on the legal side, what can you do proactively to mitigate risk of crisis before it becomes public? And same on the CX side, what can you do internally by identifying chronic issues, for example, or what makes sense to make sure that you're identifying potential places for exposure?
Yeah, so you nailed it on the head. The pre-crisis planning is key from a legal perspective, and part and parcel of that is reviewing your applicable contracts to knowing what your remedies might be in the event of various crises. And so I think that's probably key from the legal side of things. And also just understanding where your pain points are. You know, we partner with crisis management testing firms that will come in and kind of do tabletop exercises, do real world exercises with your team, and they will push you to the point of failure so that you learn, okay, this is really where the wheels came off, and you learn how your C-suite, how your executives respond to crises, right? And so that can be a very valuable lesson as well.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap it up with one thing that I get a lot of pushback on that I really want to urge everyone on this call who's still here to think through, which is to plan for crisis, right? So systems, people, staffing, ops, all of these things need to be stress tested. When we were doing the liquidity crisis in 2008, same thing happened. The liquidity crisis happened because banks did not test for certain events, so they didn't have enough in their banks. Same here, same story. If you have a system that manages your employees or scheduling stuff, all of this needs to be tested. With Lauren's example, why you can protect yourself from not losing all your customer contacts. Well, if you tested that earlier, you would know that you need another site and backup sites to back up all your data or core information. These things only come out when you do this stress testing. And the stress tests happen when you don't have a crisis, not when you have a crisis. That's it. Yep. I know we're at time.
Here's our contact information. We would love to hear from all of you with follow-up questions. To see how we might be able to help. Please store us as resources so that we can we can help you and your companies through what hopefully never happens, but will inevitably at some point.
Thank you everyone for
Thanks, guys.
coming.
Thanks,
Have a great
Liliana. Thanks, Rachel.
afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.